Update, we have testnet has Uniswap v3 on it. That will be going out early next week. So we'll be able to show people how to interact with adding liquidity to subnet pools come next week, which is really exciting. Took a very long time to write that, but I won't spoil the fun. It's just something that people can test out if they really want, if they're interested in what we've built around v3 pools. That's on testnet right now. So thanks, Sam. So now we're just waiting for Ken to come back here, but we are live on Twitter. Is the sound coming through? So you can join this call from Twitter. Is the sound coming through for people over there?
I haven't heard any sound from Twitter, but I haven't.
It'd be nice if someone could go and do both sides and see if indeed it is working.
I can pull it up on my Twitter on my phone. We're breaking ground. We're doing new innovative things.
It is coming through. Wow. It's like we're peering out from the underground into the air above. It's just delayed on Twitter. That's fine. You got to come here first for breaking news inside of the Discord. And I don't think we will ever leave. Discord is so terrible. It always has problems, but I will be here until the day I die, every Thursday.
Do we know what number novelty search is?
No, I do not. 500? No. It's definitely more than like 100 now. So it's yeah. But I don't know. They some of them were recorded, but in different places. It would be fun to do a novelty search where we just went back through all of the novelty searches and all the TGFTs and did like a montage of the greatest moments. Once per year or something like that.
There's definitely been some good ones.
The one last September when Jake came in, he was like, I fucking figured it out.
Yeah, no, I think that was my favorite one too.
Best tier moment.
The macrocosmos.
Yeah.
That was really good.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that became that us figuring it out became Templar, and Templar is, training APs now, and so yeah. And maybe even part of IOTA at this point. So, but we hadn't actually fully figured it out. We were really just guessing what was happening. We did figure out FedAv, which was pretty good, and it was quite distributed and incentivized. So that was pretty incredible. But there was a long way to go. We didn't get Templar running for another 4 months after that point. So it was slightly premature.
There was so much confidence when you joined. You were like, it's working, it's perfect. You rocked it.
I'm sure you've had moments like that with Bitmind, Ken. You're like, oh,
100%.
Oh my God, the equation for all equations has been discovered. We've found the holy grail of determining reality from fiction.
And then you find a new problem. You realize it's harder than
which is maybe a good place to start, actually, Ken. So why the fascination with figuring out what reality is, and this problem in particular?
Yeah. So when we started this, one of the hypotheses was that this was really going to affect the 2024 election cycle, and that being able to make this determination or differentiation between reality and non-reality was going to be really important. Generative AI was getting better and better, and really determining truth and understanding what is reality is part of what makes us human. And it's just never been more blurry today with AI getting better. And so being able to solve this problem, I felt like was a really critical problem to solve for humanity.
Since 2024 to now, have we fallen off that cliff?
Well, so what was really interesting is that I felt like it didn't affect the election cycle, and it wasn't just the US presidential election. 2024 was actually like a massive year for elections around the world. I believe Taiwan had their election and also India. And supposedly it was a little more effective. It affected those races a little more there. But I feel like just recently, at least from what I've observed in a lot of the news, some of these recent conflicts, and I also just think the improvement in generative video and generative image have really like made it super confusing, and not just like viscerally, but I think also just from an annoying standpoint. People love their social media experiences, and now you're like doom scrolling and you have to go into the comments, figure out what's going on. And I've actually been finding myself using just our tools more than ever, because this is stuff I care about. Is World War III going to happen? And I don't know what I'm looking at.
Right. Maybe it will just happen in our minds and we won't even know if it's actually happening, because we'll just be watching like AI generated videos of some conflict when in reality the whole thing is a charade. Or we're basically, speeding into something and going in the wrong direction, or thinking we're going one way when we're not, because our echo chambers are so much more powerful and so much more capable of keeping us inside of a thought bubble, when we can basically build an infinite number of evidence to maintain it. When I was doing ads in a previous life, one of the interesting things about advertisement and the echo chamber is that you're not likely to be getting what you want to see. Is as in like that's usually what people expect. Oh, echo chamber, I'm going to be given what I want to see, but it's actually more like rage baiting. We get given the things that we hate the most, because that's actually the most appealing information, is things that like viscerally trigger our our triggers. The things that like that really polarize us. And so maybe it's not just elections, but just in general the noosphere of humanity that is going to be infected by false information.
Yeah, the whole advertising space is fascinating. I mean, it really does prey on like what you talk, like triggers, like your emotional bandwidth, and it's pretty fascinating how much these companies, so whether it be social media, Amazon, these large companies know about you and what they're able to do with targeted ads. And then you think of, okay, now you don't even have to pre-create the content. It can predict your emotional profile and how you're feeling throughout the day, and make those targeted ads towards you to try to manipulate you to do whatever is in their best interest. And so yeah, there's definitely like a bunch of Black Mirror scary worlds. But like, has anyone seen this movie Mountainhead?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Jake, have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen Mountainhead.
It's on HBO Max. Definitely would recommend checking it out. It's a comedy, but the premise of the movie is that it's these like, really rich guys going on vacation, but two of the guys have AI companies, and one of them, it's like the equivalent of OpenAI and TikTok combined. And his generative AI content has put the world in a like complete chaos. And there's riots and governments are getting overthrown everywhere. And then the other guy has a company actually similar to Bitmind. It's like trying to identify what's going on, and they don't go into like I don't know, the actual AI that caused this government meltdown, and it's told in a very like lighthearted comedic fashion. But I think it's a really good. Oftentimes, life imitates art, and I think we're seeing this play out. That like some of these early sci-fi movies are now playing out because like this is what's in humans' heads that they're trying to develop. And I think it's a really interesting thought experiment into the future of what could happen if we're not able to differentiate some of this AI generated content.
So this image of buildings being destroyed that's fake?
Correct. So this was something that I tweeted either a week or two ago, but it was an image from a Twitter account. I don't know if it was like the official Iranian news outlet, but it got over 1 million views, and people couldn't agree on community notes, so it wasn't flagged yet. Grok got it wrong, said it was real or couldn't differentiate, and then Bitmind was able to actually detect it as being AI generated, and eventually it got community noted. Grok revised its answer because of the community notes, but that was over 8 to 10 hours of it just being online, going viral. And the way people consume news nowadays is through social media, and this content spreads like wildfire. And so that 10 hours, you could really make informed opinions, especially with critical information like, world conflict and war.
Wow. And so Bitmind was one of the first, if not the first, tools that detected this image?
Yeah, our tools detected it. I did a repost and tried to highlight it. And there was definitely a lot of increased activity on our applications, especially during when the kind of Israel-Iran conflict first broke out. I think there was just like a lot of content and people were confused, but also their timelines were completely flooded with that type of information. And there was both a lot of real content, but AI generated content. Like something I was super surprised by was there was this video of an Iranian newscaster and they got like bombed mid newscast. And I was like, this has to be fake. And it was real. And so like the other kind of interesting nuance here is that reality is so crazy right now that it really makes it even more difficult.
So you're starting to doubt even normal things like whether or not you're speaking to cons right now.
I mean, right, if you think about last week's novelty search, like evil const or Bittensor intern sounded very much like const. Like we even had an internal discussion, like was this a psyop? Like was this a planted 11 labs voice generated const? Like who knows?
So it begs a question that going around and labeling images as fake is an important job, but also it sounds like going around and actually labeling images as real is of equal importance for Bitmind, which is a lot more content, but maybe we're actually getting to a point where there's almost parity. There's almost just as much fake content as there is real.
100%. That's super, super critical. Let's see, like, sometimes you really want to prove that something is real. And there was like, when we first started, there was like this viral clip of Caitlyn Jenner, like doing something and everyone was like, this is fake, but it was real. And then now you're having to defend yourself that no, this isn't AI generated. And so I think both sides of the coin are actually equally important, as you were saying.
How much traffic does Bitmind get on that particular problem?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead
So
of slides, but
Jumping ahead a little bit, but
yeah, no, I think we can get to that pretty quick. But basically, like, kind of everything that we were talking about so far, and maybe I'll just like kind of set up the problem, is that the core mission at Bitmind is to distinguish reality. And right, kind of ode to our logo. If anyone's familiar with the movie Inception, spinning top, it's used to, is it still spinning? Has it stopped? Are we in a dream? Are we in a reality? Is what it's trying to do. And right, the kind of going to the traffic, there's over 5.6 billion people with access to the internet, and now over 50% of people consume most of their information through social media. So this problem is huge, and the market is huge because there's so many internet users trying to, determine reality based on what they're looking at. This is the team. Myself, I introduced myself already. I'm Ken, I'm one of the co-founders of Bitmind. Dylan's our head of AI. Khan's our head of engineering. Karya's head of ops and legal. An absolute killer team of engineers. Eli's full stack. Andre is back end. Andrew and Ben are our AI guys. Alexi's doing our Web3 work. And Naz is, pumping out the tweets, helping us with the marketing stuff. And I think something that's really great is, we actually come from a really impressive set of companies, both from AI and Web3. You see NVIDIA, NASA, AWS, but we've worked together in the past. I worked with both Ben and Alexi at Near. Dylan was my college roommate. We studied AI together, and so we have a lot of trust each other, and I think it has made it a really fruitful company and place to work. I'll skip ahead to get to your question about traffic right now, but I do want to go back to that. But so over the past 2 months is where we experienced a lot of our growth. We're now getting around 250,000 requests per day. And that has obviously skyrocketed since June. And then we've also increased the amount of users that we have by over, we're growing at a 9x month over month rate right now. And what's really interesting about the request growth being higher than the usage growth is showing that if you download our applications and you're using them, you find them really useful, and you're actually, you're getting multiple requests, an exponential amount of requests per user as they join, and that expands as well, which I think is a really good signal. Some other really interesting metrics on that usage is the biggest areas of consumption right now are actually in the Middle East and Southeast Asia regions. So our top 3 countries are Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India right now. And so yeah, we're big in Pakistan, but I think there's right, it kind of makes sense because those areas are also very close to the conflict. And probably it's even more important for them to be able to differentiate some of this more recent world news.
Do you want to jump back to?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'll go back to where we were at. Okay, so I was going over the team before we went into traffic, but something that you can't gloss over here is part of every subnet is the miners. So we have some absolute legends, right? We have teams from Google DeepMind, some early people at Midjourney, and then Tensora, many of us know and love. Really world-class talent pushing the boundaries, the ball forward on computer vision. There's a lot of epic lore that I wanted to talk about here about Bitmind's fierce competition. These different teams duking it out, trying to create the most accurate, best deepfake detection models. Throughout the past year, different teams have taken the top spot, had the best model, but there's consistent competition that's happening to really distinguish reality and drive the best performant models. And something that we talk about a lot in Bittensor is just talent accrual. And I do think we're really nailing it here, right? We have some of the brightest minds in computer vision, not just in decentralized AI, but, throughout the world. These are some of the top computer vision companies in the world, and they are here mining on Bitmind. And another really fun fact is that we even met a miner team that we had such belief in. We even helped them launch a subnet, which is Subnet 18 in Zeus. Absolutely crack team, deep expertise in like weather prediction, really, really amazing guys. But the thing that I want to really highlight here is that this wouldn't be possible without Bittensor's decentralized competition framework, right? I would have never met this team from DeepMind. I would have never met the developer from Midjourney that helped develop some of the earliest computer vision models. And it's been just really, really amazing to meet these brilliant people. I've learned so much, and it's just been amazing to be a part of this community. Conti, you think it would be helpful? I was just going to go over the subnet.
Yeah. No,
and
I
just give a
definitely
brief overview.
I want to go into that chart on the right there. That looks great.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, so the current architecture of the subnet is computer vision classification. Miners are essentially trying to train models to differentiate between real, AI, and semi-synthetic, and they also run inference. And then validators, they're responsible for generating the AI data, retrieving the real data, augmenting it so that the challenges can't be gamed, and then challenging and scoring the miners. And then there's also another component, which is a proxy, which helps us serve the organic traffic from our applications. And so that was like, I don't know, a very brief, simple overview here. But you can see most of the complexity in this high-level architecture comes inside the validator. And, you know, shout out to Andrew and Ben and Dylan. They put in a ton of work into creating a really sophisticated, essentially data pipeline so that this validator runs smoothly. You'll see at the top, basically this prompt generation pipeline, which actually takes in real images and uses a VLM and then, you know, an LLM to basically describe the content in images and then generate a prompt that is fed into our generative models. And the reason that we're using our real data to generate all of our AI data is so that there's an even distribution between the content of the challenges between real and AI. Then there's like this media cache that's basically gone into so that we can be extremely efficient with both validator memory and storage. And then you get into this challenge pipeline of, right, it goes into the challenge generator, chooses the miners, sends back requests, gets the response, and then reward function, score vector, setting and distributing weights.
There's an interesting part here of this diagram, Ken, about mapping onto the full space of prompt types, right? So, okay, somewhere in there, you're going to iterate over, you know, it's a picture of a building that's been hit by an Iranian missile. And so you generate an image from one of these image generators, and you send that image over to your detectors, and the detectors, you know, say whether or not it came from that image generator effectively, right?
Correct.
What's the thought process in determining that initial like grid search over ideas? Like how do you even come up with such a thing?
Yeah. So why we wanted to basically what we try to do is just map onto real data, both that are in data sets and that we scraped. In the grid search of basically, I think what you're talking about is what topics and kind of content to choose that we generate, is that we don't want there to be an uneven distribution of the content between real and AI generated for anti-gaming purposes. So one thing that we noticed very, very early on was that if we took, there's plenty of data sets of prompts for like AI generated, and those very hardly skew towards like women in bikinis and capybaras and like people on Mars. And so, right, you could actually, if you use those prompts, a miner could effectively differentiate between real data and AI generated data just because of the content that was in them. So really that content decision that we're making is more so about anti-gaming than it is trying to get a full distribution of the internet, which is definitely something that, like, I think why we're doing a big refactor and trying to solve, so we actually get an even distribution of something that is more correlated to what's in the wild on the internet.
The distribution of all images on the internet is a big space. So you guys take these images, they come from massive corpus, and for each one of them you pass it through a VLM, and you create this prompt. Then you create a synthetic version of the same image. So the set you simulate comes from anywhere, right? Effectively, you can go through any images from the internet.
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
like we have a set of static real image and video data sets, but there's also this kind of process of we've been working with a couple different teams of getting, infinite real data scraping and new data getting submitted to us that we can describe as well.
So at the end of the day, how do you evaluate how well you're doing here, and how well are you doing? Like, how do we know if we're best, and if these DeepMind guys are actually as good as they say?
Yeah, let's jump to this. Okay. So here, right, we really think, and this is a bold statement, but we have the best deepfake detection solution in the world. And kind of why we think this is a pure play subnet, right? One of the things that we loved about this problem for Bittensor at the beginning was just how well the problem was defined, right? You can score it so easily. And so talking about how well we're doing, right? The process that we conducted to get these scores of 88% image accuracy in the wild results and 62% video accuracy in the wild is basically scraping a set of real images on the internet and real videos on the internet, and then using models that aren't incentivized in our validator, in our incentive mechanism. So basically both real data and generated data that isn't in distribution of anything that the miners are getting challenged with, and saying, hey, you haven't seen this at all. This is out of distribution. You're not getting rewarded for it. How do you perform on it? And so we've seen 88% accuracy on images and 62 on video. And so I think we were even really surprised about the quality and the accuracy of the image results. We are still lagging behind on video. And we believe that's primarily because the state-of-the-art closed source video models are much farther ahead of the open source video models, whereas the image open source models are like really good and almost caught up. LoRa, there's a variety of these very high quality image generation models.
Sorry, why would you perform better if the image models are better themselves at making very realistic images?
Specifically the open source ones. So because there's better open source image generation models, we're actually able to put that in our validators. We can put these models in our validators to actually generate the media, but we can't put VO3, Sora, Kling in the validators because they're closed source. And so there's that lack of state-of-the-art generated data on the video side that miners aren't getting incentivized with.
Interesting. So it's the actual, there's always this give and take between the ability to detect and to generate, right? Hence, the conversations we've had about things like GANs, right? Where it's like, if you can generate something, then you can detect it because you can build a model that can detect the thing that you're generating. And then, and if you have a detector, you can also build better generators because you can train on trying to generate something that goes past the detector.
Exactly. And really excited about that approach. But I do think one of the bottlenecks, and maybe I can go to this right now, maybe one thing I did want to touch on before going into some of the challenges we're facing and some of this, the new architecture we're thinking about to solve that video performance along with some others, is just our applications and right where we've seen this growth come from. So Fish talked about last week that Celium subnet 51 is a pure commodity subnet, and was talking about some of these root weight discussions in the context of that. And when I was thinking about Bitmind, it's a commodity that actually needs to be refined in order for very useful end consumption, right? It's almost like natural gas. You can't use natural gas just by itself. This needs to be processed and refined, and then it's a very useful source of energy. But just, you can't just say, hey, all this natural gas, I'm going to use it right now. And so because of that, the products and refinement are extremely important for us. And so we went to market with a variety of different applications, but our core applications right now are the browser extension, which is called the AI detector. And that's actually where over 99% of our traffic that I talked about previously in my slides are coming from. We have a mobile application, which is basically a game that is used to basically raise awareness. It's a Tinder style game. You swipe right or left to determine if something is real or AI. But this really set us up for mobile expansion, but also set the foundation to potentially do RLHF and label unknown data. And then lastly, we have a native X integration called Bitmind bot. You can interact with it, tag it, and it will tell you whether your media is AI generated or not. Okay, yeah. We released this research paper, Survival of the Fittest Detectors. We kind of go over our competition design, our incentive mechanism to create the accuracy that we've shown in the previous slide, and also our process for doing the evaluation. And then we have a supplementary section at the end. We worked with one of our monitor teams where they kind of discussed what their solution was for creating a very high quality miner. I'm going to jump a little bit. Where? Okay. I'll just go to this. So, right. Some of the challenges that we face that kind of you talked about, and we've been talking about, Jake, about, hey, can these GAN architectures help? It's kind of a cat and mouse game. You really need to have good generators. Right. That piece I talked about and what we discussed of state-of-the-art data collection is a challenge that we face to really get the highest quality results. And this state-of-the-art data is actually shifting over time. New models are coming out all the time that you need to adapt to. And then the other two challenges that we have are scale. So we have ambitions of growing 1,000x from where we are now. We just grew, 10 to 30x, but what we want to do is actually get to 100,000, 1 million daily active users, and enabling that inference, with the miner validator interface is challenging, but solvable. The second is data privacy. So we've talked with a lot of enterprises that believe our services could be really useful to them, but often when you tell them that their data is getting distributed to 200 plus servers, which are the miners that we don't have control over, it can be a hard stop. And John Durbin talked about this yesterday on Mark Jeffries' podcast, and it's really a challenge that many subnets face when trying to do enterprise integrations. But because of that, and our discussions about GANs is why we are kind of completely, I don't want to say nuking the subnet, but flipping it on its head and implementing a new architecture, which is live right now on testnet number 379. We were doing it in stealth, and we're calling it the Generative adversarial subnet. And it's actually inspired from our conversations, but fundamentally from GANs, which are generative adversarial networks. This was kind of a technique, an architecture developed by Ian Goodfellow in 2014. And high level, how it works for the audience is that there's a generator network, which learns to generate new samples, images in this case, that resemble the training data. And then there's a discriminator, which learns to distinguish between real and generated samples. And they go at each other in this competitive process between the generator and the discriminator, help the generator increasingly learn how to create realistic data. And so what we're doing with the gas architecture is using this competitive framework inside a subnet to instead, what GANs do, try to use it to generate the most realistic data, but actually create the best detectors, discriminators in the world. And so at a high level, the modification on the GAN is there will be two types of miners. There'll be discriminator miners and then generative adversarial miners. The discriminator models will now be submitted to storage instead of running the inference, which is what they're doing now, along with a Docker container so that the validators can run it. And the generative adversarial miners will be challenged with prompts or prompts and data and be incentivized to produce the highest quality data possible. And so briefly going into the incentive mechanism before I get into why we thought this was so great is that the discriminator miners are going to be rewarded essentially for the same performance that they were previously, for their accuracy in both detection and segmentation. For the generative adversarial miners, they're going to be rewarded for creating data that adheres to the prompts, which is going to be a big challenge in this new design, but also being able to actually fool the discriminator models so that they classify their generated data they're producing as real. One interesting thing about this design is that, Jake and Ala actually came to us, maybe about 6 months ago with this idea. You guys should do some sort of GAN style subnet. This is perfect for detection. And I looked back at what we did. We did some analysis on this at the time, and we concluded that we should actually stick with the previous architecture that I outlined. And the rationale, which I believe still holds today, is that this gas architecture does add complexity, and that previous architecture was working. But however, right, as we scaled, as we expanded, we ran into these challenges. And what's so amazing about this new design is that it solves all of these challenges with this architecture update, right? The system can now scale massively. The models can be hosted in the Bitmind cloud. We can enable all auto scaling, reduce latency, right? Avoid the validator miner communication, and just integrate it into our infrastructure that we've already put a ton of work into. It's inherently, we can ensure privacy preserving for enterprise customers that care about their data and don't want to open source it or distribute it. And then lastly, and possibly most important, is that, and why we really need to nail the incentive mechanism around these generative adversarial miners, is that what we want to do is incentivize them to use the state-of-the-art generation models to earn rewards on our subnet, utilizing the rewards in the emission of Bittensor to collect data that can be used to train the next level of the best detectors in the world, and really stay ahead of the generative AI innovation that's happening right now.
So you're both the black hat and the white hat?
I think it's almost like now the miners now are both the black hat and the white hat.
I mean, that's very Taoist, so it makes sense. We thread the center. Black hat, white hat. A couple questions about the design and the architecture here, Ken. It's really exciting that you guys are doing this. Going back, so let me see if I can repeat back what you're saying. So you have these two types of miners, the discriminators and the generators. The discriminators, they're a machine learning model or an agent. I'm assuming they're a machine learning model. and they're hosted on distributed server infrastructure, like something like Shoots or Targon. What is it?
Yeah, I think right the nuances of the kind of application architecture are we're still kind of trying to work that out, but I think right Shoots, Targon, any of these like, you know, inference providers that we can do in a decentralized and cost efficient manner, I think would be, you know, really great for it. The thing that this piece solved about where it's hosting the inference is really the privacy preserving piece. So I think specifically with what Manifold is doing in exposing right TEs on compute, that's a really good solution. And I know John and the Shoots team are going after this kind of privacy preserving architecture as well.
But you could,
Right.
you yourself could run the models as well on your own hardware, right?
Yeah, I think right that would be the easiest to, you know, because we already have existing infrastructure that essentially processes the requests, and there's actually a lot of pre-processing that goes in this like Bitmind cloud bubble right here of like there's C2PA, there is a set of known fakes and real images that you can look up. So basically, it tries to use also all the existing best practice infrastructure to detect deepfakes right now, and then only if it can't pass that is when it goes to the subnet. But that's, to be honest, like the majority of the internet. It's super high entropy.
So generators, though, they're sitting behind an endpoint, or are they also online?
Generators will be conducting the inference themselves. And so what we theorize is there's actually potentially like two ways you can go about this. You could train your own generative image or video model, but something that we also want to incentivize and we think might be the fastest way to be getting a top level miner is to, yes, be using like an endpoint from VO3, Midjourney, Kling, Sora, and basically submitting that model to, or submitting that data that is generated from those models essentially to the subnet, but to the validators so that the discriminators can train on it.
Right. So you're not making it something that has to be hosted for that reason, so that it can source the entire world for the best in class video generation, the best in class image generation. In fact, like all APIs, all public paid and not paid APIs will be scraped by miners on the network in order to generate the least detectable fake images. And so in order to check that they're actually generating these images, you iterate through your grid search of potential images, correct? And you have to ask them to generate a new image. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So let's see. I'm gonna go back a little bit. Okay, so right here. Actually, maybe I'll just talk about this right now. So basically, what we are migrating to, this is something that we actually just released and is live right now, but we've introduced a new type of challenge for discriminators or detectors, which is just segmentation. And what that does is basically provide pixel level mask of anything that's been modified. And this is like a really cool new feature that we believe will be another differentiator in our applications. But the piece that applies to that grid search of what you're talking about is this infinite real data scraping. So previously, right, we used a combination of like, you know, infinitely growing data sets or static real data sets that were very popular in machine learning. But now by doing this infinite real data scraping, we have much more, it's much closer to the entropy of the internet and reflecting real world organic content that is what we are striving to classify. And so when we go back to this architecture and that grid search of like, hey, what are the challenges that are sent to these generative adversarial miners? It's going to be a combination of both describing that real data that was scraped, but also I think we also do want to bake in some sort of some sort of like, hey, like what do people actually prompt these models generally for? And can we catch those trends as well? The issue with doing that in the past is when you had static data sets here, you needed to do data augmentation to avoid lookup attacks. That was almost like the most critical attack vector to create your incentive mechanism around for anti-gaming. And when you get into now this infinite real data scraping, you don't need to do that anymore. And you don't need to do data augmentation. And so the goal now with these updates, along with this new architecture, is to just try to, as closely as possible, map what is in the real world and what people are looking at from real organic content as well as generative content.
As a result of having these detectors hosted, there was a point that I think maybe you got skipped over, but you can take that result that you're validating and actually put it behind your cloud, and you can scale that inference server to host in like a really high fidelity, high uptime way, the best discriminator models.
Exactly. So like, right, I think that is, I think, one area where our team has the correct knowledge and experience to do so. Right, a lot of us come from like AWS and other kind of traditional large enterprise software companies, where I feel very confident, we can execute on the massive scale of just traditional microservices and applications, right? And we can serve this in a really performant way. And so one of the things that I'm also just really excited about is like, I think we're going to be able to reduce our latency by orders of magnitude by being able to, actually host the models closer to the application and just like really streamline and optimize that, that process.
Right, which harkens back to what you were saying about how your commodity is something that needs some refinement in order to go to the application layer. What
Exactly.
about the ethics of this, Ken? Like, you're incentivizing the production of dangerous actors potentially.
When I think about the ethics of this problem, I actually more think of it so what I don't want to do is get into uh like content moderation per se. I mean, right, anyone's allowed to do what they want, but I think what's really important is to make sure that this is just a tool to identify, and then users can choose what they want to view. Like, can they have a toggle to, see this information, not see this information, or just like actually just add additional information, see it overlaid. In terms of the ethics around, we're incentivizing miners to generate like adversarial or dangerous content. I think I don't view that necessarily as an ethical question. I think really what it's about is, right, I think the problem that we're trying to solve is well defined and has I think a solid moral compass to it. And so this is just a mechanism to solve one of the biggest challenges that we're facing when trying to solve this problem. And people are generating this data using whatever models they have already. This is just a way for us to do it in a systematic way that increases the performance.
It's also to note is that the generators are not public, right? So hypothetically, they're just coming from other actors that are already out there. You're just sourcing them in order to build a better discriminator, which is used by the world to actually detect those models. So you're catching up as fast as you possibly can to the bad actors. You're sucking the bad actors towards you and forcing them to train your detective model. So you're kind of like sucking the poison from the wound of going harking back to the beginning of this conversation about how this technology can be used to muddy the consciousness of humanity, to send us off a cliff towards World War III. you're taking all of the best scientists in the world that would be capable of actually training that type of generator, and you're bringing them and you're paying them to be effectively white hats, and training your detector model. Like I think that, you know, that's ultimately what it's about. Giving, you know, I really like the analogy of we're sucking the poison from the wound, right? You're pulling out the poison, the venom.
Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy as well. And although the generative adversarial miners, the generative miners won't be, you know, open source potentially, right? Like they're kind of incentivized to use APIs or closed source models. What we're doing is we are open sourcing that venom that we're sucking out from them, is we're putting that in the wild for anyone to train on. And, you know, all these services, right? Data is a huge moat for them. I think with OpenAI, I think with Google as well, you know, some of their biggest advantages, right? They have a lot, but it really is in this data collection, this massive user base of people iterating on their products, and that increasing their way to improve. And so this like venom sucking exercise is saying, hey, we are now going to use the power of, you know, open source, decentralized crypto economic incentives to get that same data advantage that you had, and really try to create a powerful product for the good of humanity.
Right. And the incentives are already there. Let's be honest about it, right? The incentives to manipulate public opinion with the best generative adversaries, funded by the United States, funded by Israel, funded by Iran, you know, who cares? There's money out there for people that want to manipulate public opinion. And we can be the most efficient in the world at extracting that quality, because it is actually a quality, from the internet and turning it into the best defense. Yeah, this is super exciting, Kenya. I think you're going to learn a lot. I'm really curious about what the miners have to say, like these teams that, you know, honestly, some of them might as well be on the stage with you. You should ask them to come up at some point. Like, what's their take on this push? Like, I mean, and also like speaking to other subnet owners out there was such a massive architectural shift. Like, is there pushback from your mining community? Is there pushback from your holders? Is there pushback and from anywhere? From Iran? Are they like, oh no, you're stealing our our best adversarials? Miners, they're working for you now. They're not at Fordo.
Who's the president of Iran?
Ayatollah.
Ayatollah. What's the Ayatollah think about the new Bitmind update?
The Ayatollah isn't super happy, but he's like, he's also, he has his hands full right now. He's, you know, he's working. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? I think let's see. So like, right, part of the epic miner battle is there's actually already been a lot of, I would say like churn or unhappiness with like the competition and what's happening, right? There's been, you know, the miners have been unhappy and have expressed that through their holdings and what they do already. So there's already been a decent amount of that. But I would say like the current state of it with this change is always hard. And whenever you make an extremely large design decision like this, I would say it's like, you know, maybe not at the scale of detail, but in the context of our subnet, it's like, you know, a massive change that's going to really affect all of the stakeholders down the line. And it's essentially trading one set of problems for the other. And so, right, you're now splitting incentive between the discriminators and the generative miners. And so there's definitely some concern over, hey, like, where's our emission going to go? Is this going to work? There's all these new attack vectors. How are you going to stop them? But we've always taken the approach since we joined Bittensor, is like one of the goals that we laid out at the beginning was try to be one of the most approachable subnets. When we started, you know, working on the network, we were mining and it was like, you know, how helpful would it be to hop on with a subnet owner to try to get started mining or get started validating? And so we try to have really excellent and like consistent communication with all of our miners. And what I've just tried to communicate to them with this big upgrade is, yes, there'll be change. Yes, we'll have to work through some problems, because when you make this big design change like this, like the miners will exploit any vulnerability that you have. But long term, right, because it solves these core problems that, right, are these challenges that were affecting the kind of current subnet and applications, this is going to give us the best chance to scale, create the best models as fast as possible, and really take over this emerging market that I discussed. Really can affect absolutely everyone with internet access.
Mhm.
And so, right, I think high level, there's a level of trust. Is like, we've always tried to approach this honestly, and with with humility, that we don't know if we're correct, but that we're really trying to do what's best for the subnet, and this will be the best decision long term for the subnet and the products.
It's a huge mission, Ken. It's like, we could just sit up here on stage and talk for like hours and hours and hours about how important it is for us to build technologies that are not fooling humans, but actually making us more intelligent and aware of what's going on. There's nobody else that's doing it like this, right? There's no other company in the world that's building detectors in such an open way. Like, you spoke about exploitation. The reason why we get exploited over and over and over again, and it takes months and months sometimes for us to craft. I mean, sure, it's not going to take months and months for you, Ken. Now you're like a seasoned subnet developer. But the reason it takes so long is that we build fully in the open. Like, there's no orb with some fancy technology inside the orb, but don't look inside. Well, and trust me, bro, it can detect a human. It's every person in the network has the opportunity to shit test what you wrote, and that's why it's exploitable, because every angle is going to be pulled at. But eventually we build these technologies which truly are like pinned in space through exploitation. Like they're so firm that they cannot be moved, but they're absolutely trustworthy because of that. Like, do we want to build the solution to this problem in any other way? Like, we can't. If we're going to try to build truth around something like the truth, we should definitely be doing that in the most transparent way. It should be a mechanism. It should be a process. Sounds like you guys are right on the tip of it, and the tip of the spear on this problem. There's really nobody there's nobody around you. There's like literally, who do we want this left to? OpenAI?
So not only is no one building it like us, but I think it's also just really hard. Like, Google actually has a competitive product called Google SynthID, and all it does is say, hey, we can detect if this data was generated by Google or not. And when Khan is our most recent hire, he was, basically the head of engineering at a large blockchain company called Axelar. And when we were recruiting him, one of the questions he had for us was, hey, I talked to my buddies at OpenAI. Like, they don't think this is possible. Like, this is a really hard problem. How are you guys doing it? And it's, shout out to the miners again. But on the point you were talking about, was in the way that we're building it. I really think this is also because of the critical nature of the problem. This needs to be built in a decentralized, open fashion. Like, would you trust Russia if they built the ultimate deepfake detection solution? Would they trust the US or a US company if they built the best deepfake detection solution? The answer is no. You can't trust this problem to a centralized entity, especially not the companies that are creating the generative AI, because there is so much opportunity, which has been proven out historically, of being manipulated or incentivized to lean one way or the other for their best interest. And so I think this is, David Lowy says this, but it's like, his favorite problems are the ones that need to be decentralized. It's not just a value proposition, kind of like the internet or Bitcoin. And I really feel like this problem is one of them as well.
Hoorah. Speaking of David, he really brought you here, no?
Yeah, like I had this a little bit at the end, but yeah, basically our journey was, there is someone called, his name is Anand Iyer. He runs a venture fund called Canonical Crypto. But yeah, introduced me to both Allah and David, and we were working on this problem. And yeah, really was super, super like critical and influential in getting us to start up the subnet and helping us through those initial problems and design decisions and just thinking through the problem at a whole. But yeah, I think that's something that's just really amazing about Bittensor. Since we joined, it's like getting the advice from an absolute legend of just technology and one of the founders of Bittensor, and then Rob and James, and then Roundtable 21, Rizzo being our first weight validators, giving us weight, trusting us before we had anything good, and Mog, yourself, the Macrocosmos guys giving feedback. I think if you approach building this honestly, there's so many really talented people that can help you be successful. But David and Alla were definitely like super critical to get this up and running.
Beautiful.
All right, I have a bunch of other things that I want to go through. I'm just gonna, the flow's messed up, but I'm just gonna crank through them.
Send it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So not only gas, but we are bringing Bitmind to mobile, integrated natively with all these socials, and it really sets us up for large consumer expansion. You can see this like GIF demo thing that we have going on here, which basically it will be smart actions. So just like if you double click any image or video in TikTok or Instagram, you'll be able to share it with Bitmind. It will run its inference on it, and we'll really design it for shareability, gamification, to really create this viral flywheel of sharing Bitmind with the masses. And then we're also updating our game, where we're exploring ideas of actually distributing our alpha token for our top labelers. If you get something like 25, 50 in a row, then we'll mix in unknown data. And so some of our best data labelers will be able to find a degree of confidence to actually determine source of truth of unknown data. And what's really great about that is we're sitting on over 10 million images, 500,000 videos that have been submitted organically, and we just don't know the source of truth of them right now. And so being able to now utilize that to help train the next generation of the best detectors is going to be really, really valuable. And then now the big vision of Bitmind. So I kind of talked about what we had done so far and jumped around a lot. Then I talked about what are some of our new releases and talked about our new subnet architecture, which is the generative adversarial subnet. The vision that we have is actually, this is actually beyond just deepfake classification. To really distinguish reality and make our commodity even more useful, we want to expand to different classification types. And so the first one that we're extremely excited about is human classification. Being able to classify just human, non-human can enable us to create a fully open source, decentralized, AI native proof of human service. We also want to timestamp real data predictions, because something that we notice is like misinformation can spread not just from like fake content, but like just using something from like 2010 and saying it was today. And that's caused a lot of confusion and just basically making our existing products and services more useful, with the goal of really creating the ultimate consumer service. And so we're starting. We started. I wouldn't say small, but we started with an extremely well-defined problem, and it was actually at the beginning. It was only images and only AI are real. It was maybe as easy of a problem from a definition, a codifying standpoint as possible. And so we've been adding complexity, and I think the next phase is increasing the amount of classification challenges that we're gonna give to our miners. And so with that, the long-term vision of this enhanced classification is this service where we can take on the evil empire head on. No one wants to orb themselves, create a fully AI native, decentralized, and open source proof of human service, which we'll call Mind ID. And I think that, this is a super, super hard problem. And there's still a lot of open questions here. But we've been thinking deeply about this for a pretty long time now. And really believe this is a pivotal moment where not only, right, it's important the way that this gets built out so that it's not controlled by the largest AI company in the world with the single point of failure in a piece of hardware, that it's like, actually decentralized and open source and beneficial to humanity. But I also think, just like from a practical standpoint, the technology is in the right place, right? Stripe came out with something that they've really reduced their fraud, like I think by over, it's like 97% reduced their fraud from like AI detection techniques. And there's a lot of progress has been made in the kind of secure computing. You now have secure hardware on many of the mobile devices, and this is only going to get better. And so I think the idea has been around a while, but I think both from a societal standpoint and technological standpoint, this is the right time to go after this problem. And it's very much so adjacent to what we have built out right now. We can I think we can add a couple different challenges, incorporate a couple new data types, incorporate some other off-chain services, and we'll be able to build something extremely high fidelity and compelling.
So we're getting rid of the orb.
We need to kill the orb.
We're going to kill the orb.
Kill the orb.
I mean, valiant, but how?
Yeah, so the orb, I feel maybe to even not go, not orb first, but like this problem has been tried a lot, as I mentioned, and almost no one has been able to crack it. What you've now seen is actually some Web 2 style companies make some progress here. Think Clear and Real. What is it? ID.me. ID.me has a huge contract with the IRS. Clear, you'll see in every US airport that you go to. But the only really like kind of like Web3 pseudo decentralized, fake decentralized company that has made really any dent in this problem is WorldCoin. And I think one, I would say that the hardware that they built, they've actually open sourced that. It is impressive, but I think there's so many fundamental flaws in how they're approaching the problem. The first is that there's just this single point of failure in the hardware itself. If you're able to crack that hardware in any way, then okay, anyone who orbs themselves in it, right, their biometric information is now exposed. And maybe even anyone who has done that overall. And so that is just, a huge, huge issue. And I think also just the people who are running it, right? It's like, Sam Altman and team, and the way that they, I think, have approached a lot of what they've been building, starting off OpenAI as a nonprofit, going to a for-profit, now kind of beefing with Microsoft. I think there's like just large ethical concerns over how, you just don't know where they're going to shift this product over time. They were going out and collecting, retina data from basically only emerging markets, right? Only people that needed I don't know how much they were giving out, the $2 to $3 that they were giving out to scan your retina. and now they've expanded, raised hundreds of millions of dollars backed by Sam. Now there's a flashy store in Austin. There's like a big one in Miami. One, it's weird. Two, I just think there's huge problems that right, a seamless software AI native approach can, one, do a highly accurate job of classifying proof of human, but then also just creating a better overall product around it.
There's a good argument to be made that the creators of such a device, even though it's open source, they understand the technology incredibly well. They have access to the orbs. And if you have access to the orbs and how the orbs work, you could do what you're doing on Bitmind with the GAN to train as many eyes that fit through your detector as you can. And eventually they're going to have to close down the orb, and so ultimately that's the direction they're going to go. That's my prediction, which then just leaves the definition of a human to a corporation. We're just going to go and outsource that to a company called WorldCoin. You guys get to define humanity. And this is what allows you to use Sam Altman's, the person that's building the tools that can fake humanity is in bed with the people that are supposedly supposed to detect it in a for-profit company in not a very transparent way.
It's the biggest red flag of all time.
Ultimately know that that's not a great idea. And
yeah.
And so how do we do this better with Bitmind so that we don't fall prey to the same issues? Or is that all just, am I just casting, stones in a glass house? How can we make our ID truly better, safer, fairer, more transparent, more open, more trustworthy?
There are a couple, I think, big design decisions that you would need to do to make it better. I think you kind of need to solve two things at once. You need to make it like, better, more trustworthy, etc. But you also actually just need to have it be like maybe a better working experience. And I think with both of them, you can kind of, on the practical standpoint of the technology being there, right? Verifiable credentials where biometric information is stored inside those verifiable credentials on your own device. And then you use some sort of MCP style backup in a decentralized manner so that you can recover your proof of humanness if you lose your device. And TEEs and what Rob is working on, I believe if you design it in a way that even if you wanted to, you couldn't close it down because you don't have any of the data or any of the, any of this like really highly valuable bioinformetric information or ways to centralize it on a server, then you can avoid the pitfalls of that like centralization of where you predict that WorldCoin is going to go. And then on the
So you're saying that instead of giving out a token and saying, hey, you're a human now because you have a token, which is a bit odd, right? Because it's obviously likely fungible, or somebody can take your phone. I've gone to the orb. I've gotten my human token, so now I've proved myself. You're building a machine that can natively detect your humanity in real time every time you enter the phone or every time you log into a website.
Yeah, the idea is essentially that, like, you would, to verify you're a human, it probably is not like maybe every time for any website, but probably the high impact use cases of like, you know, maybe anything like government related, or, you know, you could even think, you know, your like your wallet or your bank, or even maybe thinking very down the line, some sort of like UBI, or something that I even like to think about is like uh, universal basic access to AI. You know, you're going to be completely left behind if you're not using this stuff, let's say in like 20 years. And like, okay, you need to pay OpenAI $200 or someone X amount of money. And so now, you know, the economic distribution of wealth gets even bigger. It's like you need to be able to just go to something and log in, but that is the general idea behind it. You can log in anywhere, prove that you are who you say you are. All the information is stored on your device. It's still recoverable. If you lose it or anything is gone, and you can prove it with your humanness. And then it uses these open standards like OpenID 4. And what the subnet would do in this case is both help verify as the discriminators that, you know, this is true, but also kind of what you talked about in this model, the generative miners would try to consistently harden the system so that it couldn't be attacked externally by like another actor or a real human. And I'm really excited about that ending up being a way better, more secure, more dynamic approach long term than a static piece of hardware that who knows what the exploits are. In 10 years, they find this massive issue with it. Everyone has to reorb themselves. Like, I don't know. I can just see like you outlined a couple of million issues.
I think it's a very expensive approach. I think that it's you know, it's just clearly dystopian and for so many ways. If you guys build the best detector in the world, or the best detector of fake human, something that you can update and have the miners continuously pushing new updates to in a transparent, distributed way, distributed, owned way, right? It's like the ownership of that thing that gets better and better and better and better at detecting humans. You know, it's not just a drop in the bucket. It's not just a single flash and awe meme coin experience where, oh, look, there's an orb. That sounds interesting. I might get. And in fact, with this technology, you can build any number of world coins from now until the end of time. And the next world coin built with Bitmind or Mind ID 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0 will be better and better and better. So is this something that you guys plan on sort of like taking cross chain, like building out services that work on like really the sky's the limit. It's such a brilliant idea, Ken, very exciting. And of course, this image kind of looks dystopian though. I would say it's kind of scary. I don't know.
yeah. No, this was my Photoshop skills. This was Photoshop. Maybe I can talk about like. So I think with Mind ID, right, a lot of what does make sense in a lot of cases, especially with these kind of like decentralized approaches to things, kind of bootstrapping your user base with Web3 makes a lot of sense. But and where we want to launch this is kind of our timeline, and I'll just jump. Like we want to include this new classification and begin to roll out like the beginning versions of Mind ID in Q4 this year, which is ambitious, but I think we can do it. And I think what we want to start with is some sort of, I agree, Web3 use case, but ideally I would love to build it out on Bittensor, because right now almost everyone is at least giving away some sort of free distribution, essentially to prove out their digital commodity. But at the same time, everyone is racing for this revenue. And so, you know, John's talked about it. A lot of other folks have talked about it, but, you know, having some like free tier, free access, and could you get that free access instead of like a login credential? Could we test it out and harden the system and make sure it works for higher impact use cases with some sort of use case on Bittensor? And then, yes, I do think like expanding it out to, you know, crypto wallets, other chains. But I think like high level, you know, if you have a proof of human, you can integrate that anywhere. Like another thing I really hate about WorldCoin's design is like, you know, why do you need your own blockchain? What is that? What does that add for you? What is the big deal with optimism to make an L2 do for it? You know, aside for like VCs like love it because you have your own chain. Um, and so I kind of think about it as like it wouldn't be it wouldn't necessarily be blockchain based at all. It would really just be it would be a pure system to just detect, given a set of information, is this a human? Is this not a human? The data is all stored as like, you know, human centric. It's stored on device on each individual's device. And then that just keeps getting better over and over time. But it's not dependent on any specific chain or set of technologies. It's just a system, a software system that improves over time.
Beautiful.
So end of year proof of human. That's
That's
when
what we're shooting.
that's when we'll rid ourselves of evil const. But we have, it looks like it's not gonna be for another 180 days or something.
Yeah, still some time. Still some time. And then yeah, like right, well, let's see, like we plan, right? I mentioned gas is live on testnet right now. We're gonna, you know, it's already Q3 in like 5 days, which is crazy. We're halfway through the year. We're gonna be rolling it out really early in Q3, mobile app, and then basically from there until proof of human, I think just heavy go to market growth on content, advertising. We'll obviously need to update the subnet. Really trying to monetize it as well.
Beautiful, Ken. So much going on and really exciting. Thanks for this presentation. Is that the last slide there for us?
Yeah, maybe just very. We do want to monetize. Everyone's thinking about it.
Okay.
We gotta make some money.
We got everyone. You know, everyone. We gotta make money, right? You know, this is not a charity. We can't be funded by. I don't know. Yeah, like grants our whole lives, and so like basically just outlining our path to monetization is a 3-phase plan where when we roll out our consumer mobile application, we'll roll that out as a basically a paid service, a paid subscription service, really increase our mobile footprint and our brand awareness, then go into enterprise partnerships, try to integrate directly with socials, add a security layer to businesses. There's been a huge attack vector with scams on like Zoom meetings recently. And I think that's a really good setup and precursor to our proof of human. And then eventually our end goal is to really be used as a SaaS service. Anyone can integrate, you know, our services for deepfake detection, Mind ID services into their applications that are built upon our subnet and our infrastructure. And then just a brief visual right here, right? What we've calculated, current subnet price, you know, basically there's auto selling of around 30 tau per day, which equates to around 300K per month. And so we think based on a 5 to 10% paid user conversion from our expected user rate when we launch in July, we'll start with around 25K revenue. And then with a pretty aggressive, but I think realistic growth rate of 20 to 50%, we can get to 1 million MRR by 12 months and cross that threshold of mitigating the sell pressure within 6 months. And that's really exciting. And wanted to share that. But then it was this timeline of like when we're going to launch all these things and what we did previously. And yeah, that is the end.
It's great that we, like in Bittensor, we have a community that judges all of the projects from a variety of different angles. And like we on one side of the spectrum, we have like the very important mission, like the why of what you're doing. And that really appeals to people because this is, you know, you have to start with why. I'm a technical person. My favorite slide here is you know, about the GAN, right? I'm like, does it is that like a new neural network architecture? Is that subnet incentive mechanism? Does it have enough kurtosis? Like, is there UID pressure? Like, how do you balance the game theory? Like, that's what really gets me. And then there's also people here that really want to hear about the products you're building and how you're taking this to market, how you're expanding. And then, you know, finally there's people that are just, you know, very brass tacks. They're like, where's the revenue coming from? This isn't charity. You know, it's difficult to be up on stage and to like to sing to all of those different types of audiences, but you've really done it, Ken. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Let's you know, field some questions from the chat. From Fish, are current subscriptions free?
Current subscription. So basically, right, Fish, Mind, this mobile app that this is actually not even live yet. But yes, basically right now, all of our services are free. And why we think we can charge for this is because of, I think over 80% of digital interaction happens on mobile. And it's really difficult to build what we did of the native connection from like Instagram and TikTok, which are very closed applications, being able to send that data over to another application to do detection on it. And so that advanced feature is going to be paid, but it's going to be, I think, nothing crazy. And we're going to test out different price points for how we can optimize the monetization.
Great. Okay. Any more questions?
We always got compute for sale. Let me know. We're open for
Great,
business.
guys. Well, then why don't we leave it there? Rob, Ken, thanks for coming up on stage and hosting this one. First one on Twitter. Everyone following from there, thanks for coming on that side as well. Interesting and exciting. To reiterate, we got V3 on testnet coming to mainnet next week. So look forward to that. Yeah, let's leave it there. Thanks, good. Everyone have a good night.
Wait, can we do a Bitmind on 3?
Yeah.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Bitmind!
Bitmind!
Hey!
Hey,
Great novelty search this week, guys. Great job. Awesome. I will see everyone next week. Or
Okay, bye.
I will see everyone tomorrow or wherever. Wherever you are in the world, I will see you through Bitmind. Adios, amigos.
Thanks, everybody.